Inside our eye, there is a small lens. The lens is convex, and its function is to refract light. The thing is, the amount of what we see is enormous. Look around yourself right now. Your eyes simultaneously capture a huge amount of visual information that needs to reach your retina. But the retina has a very small, limited area. Essentially, the size of your eye is determined by the back surface of the eye. And you need all of this image, the entire picture around you, to be projected onto the small retina. That's why at the moment when light actually passes through the eye, it is refracted, and following that moment, the image we see is then focused onto the entire retina. But the focus must fall exactly on the retina itself. This is how our vision is focused. But focusing happens when light passes through a kind of lens like this. This lens is a natural wonder lens of the eye, a special jelly-like substance. The lens is quite flexible, it's gelatinous, and it can change its shape. There is a ciliary muscle there, and there are ciliary ligaments. There was even a theory that it is precisely this muscle, by changing the curvature of the lens, that gives us the ability to accommodate that, is to see at different distances. But I repeat, as I've already mentioned in one of my videos, this idea has actually been disproven, because when the lens is replaced, when a glass lens is inserted here, it no longer changes its shape. But even with a replaced lens, a person can see both far and near. So our lens is like a little lens. Now look, friends, it doesn't matter what kind of glasses you have, for example, negative or positive lenses. What is the main task? What are the main characteristics that the lens should have? What is the most important thing a lens should have? The most important thing for a lens is transparency. That is, it doesn't matter what its diopters are, whether it's positive or negative, convex or concave, the most important task for a lens is to be transparent. And in order for it to be transparent, it's necessary that diffusely to the lens, to the crystalline lens, you have to keep in mind that the blood supply to the eye goes through the central retinal artery, which goes to the retina, while the lens is located inside. And the nourishment of our lens happens last of all. Even if we take the cornea, it still receives at least some nourishment from the tear fluid that flows over the outer part of the eye through the conjunctiva. And there are arteries there that carry blood to the conjunctiva. But our lens receives its nourishment from vessels that actually pass behind the eye. And the nourishment of the lens is the worst of all, absolutely the worst. It is the farthest away, and its nourishment is the poorest. So when the blood supply to the eye is disrupted, the lens is the first to suffer, because it receives nutrients the least effectively. And then the lens begins to, how can I explain this to you? The structures of the lens themselves, they are proteins. It's a special kind of gelatinous substance, and its main function is to let light pass through, to transmit light. In other words, to be transparent, like water is transparent. But now, fibers start to appear inside the lens, and there are specific dense areas that don't let light through. They block or delay the passage of light. Well, it's somewhat similar to this. If you want to see what vision is like for people with cataracts, try folding your fingers like this and look through them. In principle, you can still see everything, but it feels as if you're looking through a mesh. This kind of vision like looking through a mesh is characteristic of the condition when the lens becomes cloudy. That is due to poor supply of nutrients. The proper formation of proteins that make up the fibers in the lens is disrupted. If previously its structure was transparent, now opaque fibers, these little snake-like strands begin to form, and the person sees as if through a mesh. This clouding of the lens, meaning it becomes opaque and cloudy, is called cataract. And cataracts can develop over a long period of time. That is, early-stage cataracts, some minor changes, can be seen in almost any person over the age of 50. It is very rare for us to see someone over 50 whose eyes, whose lens remain completely transparent. And it starts with an initial cataract when small spots or light streaks begin to appear. And at first, the person might not even notice this because you see, it develops gradually and the person adapts, gets used to it, and in the early stages may not notice anything at all. They might not notice anything. And this immature initial cataract over time, as the blood supply to the eye worsens, the initial cataract progresses to an immature cataract, which is what most of you are diagnosed with. And immature already means that there is some clouding, but it hasn't yet formed into a distinct mass that obstructs vision. The next stage is clouding with the development of a brownish color. This is called the brown cataract. And what you see here is a mature cataract, a white opacity that completely prevents a person from seeing. In other words, a person will no longer be able to see normally through this lens. And because of this scattering, because as light passes through the lens, it hits dense structures, the light is dispersed, and instead of focusing, the person ends up with scattered vision, resulting in a completely blurred image. It's somewhat similar to looking through a mesh, like some kind of netting in front of your eyes. Why does cataract occur? Why does it even develop? Well, the first factor I mentioned, and it always proves true, is age. Of course, there are cases of traumatic cataracts, and there are congenital conditions when the eye is damaged by injury or affected from birth. But if we look at it generally, cataract is an age-related disease. With age, blood vessels become clogged with atherosclerosis. With age comes the problem of cervical osteochondrosis, and as we get older, blood flows poorly to the head circulatory encephalopathy and to the eye in particular, which is called dyscirculatory ophthalmopathy. That's why the primary reason is that cataract develops in older age. In fact, it's rare to see someone of advanced age who doesn't have cataracts. Vascular disorders are very diverse. First and foremost, it's atherosclerosis, which is the primary manifestation, and hypertension. Hypertension leads to the destruction of the blood vessels that supply the retina. And accordingly, this also results in impaired blood supply to the lens itself. This includes cerebrovascular disorders, such as the same blood clots and thrombosis, as well as impaired blood flow through the vertebral arteries and issues caused by a crooked neck. This is that hump that grows here in the cervical spine. In other words, impaired cerebral circulation, both throughout the body in general and in the head in particular, and even more specifically in the icis, also one of the factors that leads to the development of cataracts. Systemic diseases include the possible onset of atherosclerosis. This includes diabetes, certain autoimmune diseases, and metabolic disorders. Poor diet, high cholesterol, possibly alcoholism, and so on. In other words, systemic diseases are metabolic disorders. These are things that will generally lead to the deterioration of the body as a whole. But this is not specific to cataracts. Rather, it causes poor blood supply to the head in general. And as I sometimes mention, it can also be eye injuries, damage, or even in some cases a congenital condition. The main symptom is a gradual decline in vision. What's characteristic is that the vision deteriorates slowly over time. If a person doesn't pay close attention to their eyes, this decline in vision can happen so gradually and subtly that they don't even notice it. And sometimes people don't even realize that their vision is getting worse. And that's when cataracts become something of a revelation for the person discovered only at their next visit to the ophthalmologist. In other words, if someone loses their vision suddenly, they notice it right away. But when it happens gradually, that sense of suddenness is lost, and the person gets used to it. For a long time, even up to the stage of an immature cataract, they may go about their life without even realizing that something is wrong with their eyes. Vision becomes cloudy, the person squints, and things become hard to see. Very often, presbyopia develops right away. That is, the person becomes farsighted and can't see anything up close, and these issues seem to pile up one after another. And on top of that, there was no real need to read anything up close, since from a distance, the overall picture was still more or less visible. And so the person doesn't really pay attention to it. Seeing things as if through fogged up glass is a very good description when everything is cloudy and blurred. You can make out shapes and notice movement, but there's no sharpness in the image. Objects appear blurry, and even the brightness of colors can change, as well as the brightness of vision compared to color vision. Treatment. Well, cataract treatment is about improving trophic support. We need to enhance the trophic supply to the eye. Well, they try giving trophic injections under the eye, but to be honest with you, they practically don't produce any results. They also try using eye drops, like taurine or taufone and so on, but please understand, this doesn't even slow down the process. Eye drops are applied externally. They don't penetrate inside, they don't reach the lens. Injections under the eye affect the area around the eye. Maybe they have some effect, but they won't act directly on the retina. That's why all these conservative treatment methods are mostly ineffective. And when it comes to solving the problem of cataracts, they definitely won't help. And then only one option remains. They tell the person, well, you can have surgery. What is the essence of the surgery? The surgery is a lens replacement. In other words, the person's lens is surgically removed here. You can see a mature brown cataract and the area is cleaned, and a small artificial lens is inserted. So this is what the eye looked like before the surgery. You can see a gray spot. The person couldn't see anything. Here, on the other hand, the person has a clear, transparent eye, and the eye sees well. I often saw cataracts even without an ophthalmological examination when I was doing iridodiagnostics, just by taking a photo of the eye, and it was clear that there was a gray, opaque cloudiness. Yes, I can immediately recognize people with a transplanted lens, an artificial one. They have a transparent medium in the eye. With cataracts of varying degrees, the eye is already cloudy, and it becomes very difficult for the person to see. And lens replacement surgery is sort of a way, a method to help a person start seeing again. Well, it's one option. It's a solution. For many people, it's the way out. You just need to know a few nuances. The first nuance, look, at the moment when we simply remove the lens, remove the cataract, the retina does not suffer because of this. And a person does not lose their vision because of this. In other words, it is the retina that provides vision, not the lens. If you simply remove the lens without replacing it with anything, just remove it, a person will still have vision even without the lens. And the vision can even be good if you place a lens in front of the eyes, something like a -20 diopter lens, I think. And this lens, refracting light, will provide a person with the function of a kind of crystal lens. That is, even just by removing the lens, vision is restored because the obstacle in the path of light between the external light and the retina is eliminated. And the little lens that we insert simply serves as this refracting element so that the person can see. As practice shows, and again, we can see different data, but as practice shows, lens replacement surgeries are unsuccessful in 5% of cases. That's just 1 out of every 20 eyes operated on. But it's bad when it happens to you. So think 10 times over before deciding whether you really need to undergo a risky operation. Next. Very often, the quality of the lens being implanted determines how long that lens will last. In some cases, when the artificial lens is of poor quality over time, depending on the quality, it may take more or less time, but eventually the lens itself, the artificial lens, becomes cloudy, which requires additional surgeries. Third, when there is already an artificial object inside, you can no longer heat the eyes. With an artificial lens, heating the eyes should not exceed a temperature of 40 degrees Celsius. The next thing to understand is that lens clouding cataract is just the tip of the iceberg of circulatory ophthalmopathy. In other words, it all started not with this, but with the fact that blood flow to the eye began to worsen. And even if you replace the lens, it won't solve the problem of the vitreous body, it won't solve the problem of the retina, it won't solve the problem of blood supply to the eye or to the head as a whole. That's why I call treating cataracts simply by replacing the lens a symptomatic solution to the problem. Without delving into the cause, without addressing the root of the disease, and without solving the problem of blood supply to the head in general, and to the eye in particular. And that's why it produces, well, a visible effect after the operation. The person starts to see, but the destruction of the eye, the destruction of the retina continues to progress. And so while this remains the method of choice, there are still other options. How can you help without surgery? Well, due to numerous requests in the comments from my subscribers on previous videos we filmed, I was asked to finally show it. So here I am showing it. This is a 2-ball. In previous videos I had a 5-ball one, but this is a 2-ball turmanium projector, and it has 2 lampshades made of turmanium ceramic. They need to be heated to a certain temperature. There's a remote control here. You plug it into the socket and it heats up to 45 degrees. 45. Do you hear me? 45. Not less and not more, but 45. And the projector is placed directly on the eyes like this. And the eyes are warmed up. Warming the eyes is done at a temperature of 45 degrees for 15 minutes. If with the 5-ball projector, this was done on one eye at a time, here it's very convenient to warm up both eyes at once. The warming is done for 15 minutes. And this warming, if we want to solve the problem of cataract, needs to be done 5 times a day. 5 times a day. By the way, it doesn't matter what stage of maturity or immaturity the cataract is at. And with this warming, what happens is that the blood vessels supplying the eye expand due to the heat. Because of the dilation of the vessels, a good amount of blood flows to the eye, and as a result, the blood supply to the eye improves diffusely. And the lens itself also receives better diffuse blood supply. This reduces aging, slows down the rate of degeneration, and can even lead to the restoration of the natural structure of the fibers in our eye, increasing the transparency of the lens. The transparency of the lens improves because the blood supply to the eye becomes better. But the second thing that is needed is a bandage that a person puts over their eyes. This is a turmanium bandage with discs made of turmanium ceramic, which are placed over the eyes and worn throughout the night. In this case, the magnetic field of the turmanium ceramic accelerates and improves the metabolism within the eye itself, specifically in the lens. And it is precisely the bandage, when a person wears it, that leads to the proper structural remodeling of the lens, increasing its transparency. So what is needed for the eye to see better with cataracts? Warming the eyes or the bandage? The answer is this. Both warming the eyes and the bandage are needed. With just warming the eyes alone, it will be difficult to achieve the restructuring of the lens and restore its natural transparency. You also need the bandages. And just the bandage alone won't be enough, because the bandage doesn't provide as good a blood flow or improve the eye's blood supply as well as the projector does. Therefore, in order to solve the problem without surgery and to be able to see with cataracts, you need to warm your eyes and sleep all night with this kind of bandage. And friends, I want to say that some time ago, a few years back, I released these videos about cataracts, about eyes, about the possibility of treating eyes using the projector and the bandage. Well then, after some time, about a year later, I decided to check what kind of results people were getting. Since this video had reached a massive audience, hundreds of thousands of people watched it, I wanted to see, well, did it work for people? Did people actually get results? Friends, the results turned out to be diametrically opposed. For some people, the results were so good that their cataracts disappeared completely. Do you hear me? From warming and sleeping with the eye patch, the cataract disappeared completely. When people visited the ophthalmologist again, the diagnosis of cataract was removed, something that is never removed, something considered lifelong. In this case, the person had an immature cataract. At subsequent visits to the ophthalmologist, they couldn't find any lens clouding, not even the initial stage. So this cures cataracts and also clears up the cloudiness. It really does. But for another group of people, there were no results at all, even with intensive use. I started to investigate this issue. Why was this happening? The thing is, the people who saw results were also doing additional treatments to improve blood circulation to the head. To begin with, they did massage, stretching, and restoration of the natural position of the cervical spine. They stretched their necks. They learned to sleep on turmanium ceramic to thin their blood and ensure good blood flow to the head. These were people who slept on their backs, just as I always teach. Moreover, they placed a turmanium pillow under their necks. Well, either this NS50 model or the previous NM30, it doesn't even matter which one. Butane, they drank enough water. And then people saw results. There were results because they worked with the eyes while also improving blood supply to the head itself. But when people only warmed up their eyes and just used the bandage but didn't work on their neck at all, then as a result, they simply didn't get any results at all, not even a little, absolutely nothing. That's why it's necessary to improve blood supply, not just to the eye specifically, but to the entire head, so that blood reaches the head itself. And as long as a person has a crooked neck, atherosclerotic plaques, and thick blood, then simply warming up the eyes won't give the desired result for restoring the lens in cases of cataract. That's the information for today. Keep this feature in mind because to solve the problem of ophthalmopathy, you need to address the issue of this circulatory encephalopathy. You should improve blood supply not just in the eye, but throughout the entire head, and in general influence the whole body. So that was today's information for you about cataracts.